Be able to come and share with you by the way of the internet today some of the things that God's put on my heart. We are looking at the subject of I will, and we are talking about our intentional walk with Lord. And this week we're looking at Psalm 40, and we've been reading together verse number 8, which says, I delight to do thy will, O my God, yea, thy law is within my heart. So we are looking at the subject of I will rejoice. David said, I delight to do thy will. There was a joy in his heart, dear friend, and he wanted to express that to the Lord. And so we see there his great joy. Now, yesterday we looked at the fact that David was singing again because of the attention of God. Now, I want you to notice verse number 2. David is singing not only because of God's attention, but he is singing because of God's action. He says in verse 2, He brought me up also out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my goings. Oh, David is singing because of the great action of God. We have heard this verse quoted. I quote it. We talk about this verse so often. But seldom do we ever look at it in detail and put it into the context in which it was written. Now, normally it is put in the context that God has saved us, and surely there is that picture, dear friend, and we rejoice in that. But David's talking about a certain experience in his life, and so when he sings about the action of God, there's two reasons why he is singing. There is joy as far as he is concerned over what God has saved him from. What God had saved him from. And what had God saved him from? Well, God had saved him from his prison. He said, He brought me up also out of an horrible pit. Now, that pit, the word that is used there for pit, was used for a place that they kept criminals at that time, and especially those that were going to be put to death. And so they just threw them in a pit that was there. And so David had felt like that he had been in this pit. It was his prison. Well, there are times we even put it this way, when someone asks us how we're doing and we're not feeling too well, or we're struggling with things, we'll say things like this: well, I'm in the pits. Well, David really was in a pit, dear friend, but what he says is this. He said he had waited patiently for the Lord, and the Lord had brought him up out of that horrible pit. Well, I want to remind you, surely when the Lord saved us, He brought us out of a horrible pit. He brought us up out of the prison in which we were in, dear friend, and we ought to sing because of what God brought us out of. Think about what you used to be enslaved to. Think about what the Lord has delivered you from, dear friend. And so He says that God saved him from his prison. But He also says this: God had saved him from his sinking. He said, out of the horrible pit, out of the miry clay. Oh, for David, it felt like to him that things just kept getting worse and worse. I think sometimes we spend our time thinking and waiting for things to get better. When are things going to get better? And sometimes it seems like that they just never going to get better, or they don't get better. And for David, he felt like his situation was this: he was just in the miry clay. You know, when you're in that situation, and in those types of pits, dear friend, sometimes the more you struggle, the deeper you sink. And the more you try, the deeper you sink. David is talking about the hopelessness and the helplessness that he felt in the situation that he was in. In other words, David felt like there was nothing he could do about his situation. All that he was doing is sinking. He couldn't do anything. But there come a time, there come a moment when the strong hand of God reached down into his horrible pit, pulled him up out of that miry clay, and God delivered him from his prison. He delivered him from his sinking. Oh, dear friend, I want to tell you, there's joy for us today in what God has saved us from. Think in your life for a few moments about the way God has moved in your life. You remember those instances in your life when you were overwhelmed with the difficulties and the problems, and you thought there's nothing that can be done? I've had folks say this to me. I just don't think anything's going to change. I just don't think anything is going to happen here. And what they're saying is simply this. They are caught up in the hopelessness of the moment. You remember when you felt that way, dear friend? And God came your way and delivered you from that horrible pit, from that miry clay. If so, you ought to think about it a little while today and rejoice in the Lord. I will rejoice in Jesus is a decision we ought to make today. I hope you think about this. Till the next time, may God bless you.